Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our class for the evening, which is all about alternative documentation for ANS projects. My name is Mariette. I'm the East Kingdom Deputy Minister of Arts and Sciences for Education. I'm going to serve as a moderator for the time being, but this evening is going to be primarily run by our wonderful panel of speakers who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves briefly before we get underway. So we're gonna kind of free for all it here. Whoever wants to speak up, my 6 presenters.
I'll start. I'm Agatha, and I am. Aren't we supposed to say things about ourselves? Pay attention.
Well, why don't you just give us your name and your preferred title if you want to use that.
Oh, I'm Agatha Wanderer, and I am Agatha Wanderer. That's my preferred title. I don't have any.
I'm Seamus Aosda, and you can call me Seamus.
I'm Donovan Shinnock, and I answer to Donovan, and also hey you, and whatever object is thrown at me.
I'm Corotica. I'm the princess and the sovereign ANS champ. My specialties are forestry, cooking, and brewing is kind of where my ANS love lies.
I'm Vivian de Dunbar. I answer to Vivian, and I'm from the Setmore Swamp. I'm a fiber artist, and I like cooking and all kinds of sewing and all that kind of stuff.
And I am Robert McNeil. Just call me Robert. I'm a metal bender.
He's so modest. All right, so I think that was everyone, right? That was our panel. So here's what's going to happen. We have about 8 prepared questions that we're going to use as the start of the class. The panelists are going to take turns going through and answering some of those questions. We're going to start talking more generally about traditional documentation as we know it, like why we have it, documentation myth versus fact, because there's a lot of myth out there in SCA ANS land about documentation. In order to discuss alternatives, we need to know kind of what that baseline is. We're going to end with questions about alternative documentation methods. So we hope that we'll be able to get an interesting discussion going. There may be disagreements, that's okay. The big idea here is there's no one perfect way to do documentation. So we anticipate the panelists may have different points of view. You may have different points of view, but it's a conversation and it's all about what works for you. All right, and yeah, I think we're ready to get started with questions. So first question, why do we do documentation? A lot of people feel like this is a hobby. I do for fun. Documentation feels like work. So why do we do documentation?
I'll start off. Aside from when you're doing an ANS competition, you need to do the documentation so that the judges know where you're coming from and what you're trying to achieve. I think more people will see your documentation than that. A lot of times, if I see something interesting, I'll take the documentation to read later, and maybe I'm starting my own project, I'll use somebody else's documentation. So I want to know where they're coming from, what their sources are, and then a trick that when you've been an artist for a while is you go through somebody else's bibliography, and that helps you find your way. So, I said I'm a fiber artist. I love to cook. I don't have time to research everything. I take the cooking that all my friends have researched, and then I can just use their recipes. And then people will come to me and be like, what's a period sheep I can use? I've done that research. So it's kind of my contribution back to the society is the documentation that I do that I can share with everybody.
I can say something about that. There is not a project I haven't done where I haven't learned something about what I'm doing or about myself and my own process. So, you know, we do documentation to show our work, and to show that this thing that we have decided to go down a rabbit hole on, it's a way that we can share that passion with other people and do it in a way that is kind of digestible and comprehensive, which is something that I can talk about later about how I do my documentation. Short version, 1 page, 2 at most, then my bibliography, then my appendices. And that has gone very well for me in brewing, because I know with a lot of ANS competitions, I'm sure that's very exhausting for judges. So I want to give that overview so they can look at it and go, okay, this person clearly cares about what they're doing. Here's what they've done. Here's where it's coming from. Here's what they've learned. Here's what they would do different. Oh, and now if I want to, I can read the 20 pages of all of the fun little details that this person has found who obviously cares so much about it. So showing people that what you've done, personal growth.
I agree that there's a lot of reasons to do documentation. And one is, that some of them have been mentioned, I like to do documentation simply for my own record to start with. It gives me an opportunity when other people see my documentation to get feedback about what I've done. It can be used, documentation can be used as a teaching tool. But really formal documentation is something that I find hard work. And it's something I'm going to have to get into a little more in the coming year. But to me, it works best when I think of it as storytelling. And I answer some simple, basic questions. And the most basic list of questions are, what did I do? Why did I do it? How did I do it? And what did I learn? And if you can answer those 4 questions fairly clearly, and I think simply, you've communicated a lot of information. And you can get down into the weeds of any of those 4 questions and break them down into all kinds of information and sub-questions. But if you start out answering those 4 questions, I think you've gone a long ways to clear storytelling about what you've done.
All right. Any other panelists have anything to add on this one?
I definitely agree with Seamus, and what other people have been saying is that we're here to learn from one another. That's, I mean, bare bones, you read our mission statement, we're an educational organization. And the simplest way that we can represent the knowledge we're trying to impart is pretty much exactly what Seamus said, you know, just it's the journalism aspect, is do the hows, the whats, the whens, the wheres, and so forth, and keep it succinct so that interest is piqued and interest is kept. And having said that, being able to tell a story is definitely a great aspect of that. And that's what we're here for. We're here to continue telling the stories of everything we learn.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on this question before we move on?
I wonder if I could add something.
Go right ahead.
Hi, I know I'm a visitor from Eldemere, foreign country, I know. One of the things that I hear a lot of, especially with artisans who have never entered arts and science competitions or like a show and tell or display, when they find out about documentation, they seem a little intimidated by having to read sources and primary sources and secondary sources and how to manage that. And one of the things that we did in Aldermere was we established a Kingdom library on Facebook. So people can ask, I'm doing a tablet weaving project and I don't know what sources are useful to me. I know how to do it. I can describe what I'm doing, how it works in history, my step by step, but I don't know what sources to look at. And so the members of that group on Facebook, we all work at universities and libraries, or we're research people. So we're here to provide that kind of support. No one expects everyone to come to the SCA knowing how to do research, knowing how to do APA style or MLA style or School of Chicago. Like, you know, a lot of people are new, or it's been years since they've had to write anything like an essay. And really that's what comes to mind. So there are places out there to help new folks in developing your style and documentation and providing you with some support. And that's one of the groups that can do that.
Thank you for that comment. And that actually leads us really nicely into our next question, which is, how do I get help with documentation? Do I have to create all of the documentation myself?
Okay, I'm going
So
to jump into the silence.
sorry. So I have had friends of mine who are laurels and not even brewing or cooking laurels look over my documentation before I've submitted it, specifically to the for competition. And a lot of that has just been cleanup on language and helping me things sort of tighten down. I think you will always find help. It would be an interesting idea for the East to have something like the library where people can ask for help with documentation, or for example, like I'm in college because I'm insane in addition to full-time work, and saying yes to going to SDA prom on May 7th. We also have that worked out, and people are laughing good. And so I am living, eating, and breathing writing research papers and APA style, and so it is very second nature to me. And I'm realizing it's not that way for a lot of people. They are either many years out of school or never had to do that. And so I want to make my knowledge available, since I can be like, oh, here's like how you do APA citations, and it's really easy, and it'll take you like 10 minutes to pick up, instead of or maybe even having like the bare bones of a how to do a research paper. For brewing, I have a very simple setup for my rubric, which is name and brew, original recipe, the translation, my process, and then that just comes in one page. And then I kind of write all the, oh, and by the way, like, here's some information I found about how it relates to the humoral system, or here's the kind of grain I used and why, or here's the sort of well water I used and why. And it would be, yes, you can get help with documentation. I think, and I would hesitate to say, Mariette, it's a little unstructured right now on how to do that, but I know that laurels every laurel I've reached out to has always been very helpful and very welcoming with, yes, please let me look over your paper, I'd be happy to. And there is a big push in the East Kingdom right now, possibly SCA-wide, on consent culture being the thing. So what kind of feedback are you looking for? Tell me specifically what you would like me to look for with your paper, or what sort of help you want. Does that, I hope that helps. I kind of sort of rambling.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but like the thing I keep coming back to is we're all giant nerds, and we all want to see people in our little area of being a giant nerd learn things and be enthusiastic about it and show us cool things and everything else. So like, yeah, I can't think of too many people, you know, who are involved in the ANS community you know, who would be unwilling to look at a you know, documentation or look at what you've got and just offer feedback or offer advice or really anything you want. I mean, and between Facebook and the Discord and, you know, events happening in the real world again, like just asking. Like, not everyone would have the spoons for it on any given moment, right? But yeah, like, we'll help for reals. And I mean, like you're seeing in the chat, like everyone's got their own take on it, right? Like, we'll argue with like whatever citation style like works best for us until the cows come home. But like, they work, right? Like, if you run into someone and they're helping you, but like, oh man, their style just isn't quite clicking for you, like how they want you to structure it just makes no sense. Cool, go ask someone else. Like, no one's gonna get, you know, no one's gonna be cranky about that. Like, you know, it's not like we get funding based on our students or anything. That's, you know, we just want you to succeed. You know, so yeah, and don't think you need to come to us with like a finished project or a finished piece of documentation, right? You want to show up with like a pile of books, some index cards, and this is what I did when I made this spoon or whatever. Cool, great, we'll work with that. Like,
and we're friends.
What, you know, whatever you've got, whatever stage you're at, like, we exist to help you.
Isabel, chat just said something interesting, that it might be difficult for people to know how to find the right person, and maybe some registry would be useful.
I want to add that in the before times, before COVID, the East Kingdom was doing a really good job of having the tables, the consult tables, and that was a really great thing. I know you could talk more about that.
So the consultation still exists. We have actually, during the pandemic, arranged a number of virtual consultations where you can email the Ministry of Arts and Sciences, either Elena or myself, and we can work with you, figure out what you're looking for in terms of feedback, what type of help you're looking for in terms of your documentation, and try to find the right experienced artisan to work with you. So even though we haven't had as many opportunities to have in-person consultation tables, consultations are still a thing that can be done. And so, Isabel, I believe that was your comment, like, please do reach out to the Ministry of Arts and Sciences folks, because we will hook you up with someone.
It's not that I'm looking to be hooked up with somebody. I have a lot of experience with written documentation.
For other people.
It's that I think it's probably a barrier to entry for people who don't know where to start, you know, who might be shy to approach someone.
And I wanted to just to also add here that I was in the society for 20 years before I did an A&S competition, because I was scared to death that I was going to get laughed out of the place. And everybody thinks research paper. And yes, documentation is written down, but there's no reason you need to do a 13-page research paper. I have written research papers. That was my one thing. But if you're starting out, don't be afraid to just answer the question sheet. A lot of times when you're entering, we just did our barony just did our arts and science. They gave everybody a sheet, even if they had documentation. Answer these questions. What did you do? What was your purpose? And really, there's just like basic 5 questions. And don't be afraid to just come with that. There are always people who are going to be bad representations and be mean, but really, it's so few and far between. That's the one you remember. But most people, you know, are very helpful. And if you're in a competition, they're happy that you're there. So don't feel like because you didn't do 12 pages of a research paper that you can't join the competition. Because even some of them, they have different levels. Like, I love the St. Allegius in Dragonship Haven, because they have the expert category, they have the novice, they have the middle category, and that's a perfect, you can put yourself where you're comfortable. So don't be afraid of it.
All right, I'm going to take one more comment on this topic, and then we need to move on to our next question, so we stay a little bit on schedule.
I submit
Go ahead.
that even if you don't know a specific citation style or what have you, like people have said, consistency is key, but just give us the info so that we'll know where you got the inspiration from, where you got the information from. Don't worry about style. I mean, again, this is an opinion, but don't be afraid to just put down, hey, this book by this author, that's it. You know, we can look up the rest if needs be. We know that from your work that, you know what you're doing. Don't be caught up into minutia. Just show what you've learned, and we'll take it from there, and we'll be happy to help you either flesh it out or put it in a context that maybe other people will be able to glean easier. You know, but we're all here to learn and all here to partake. And best thing to do is just not barrier yourself by thinking, if I don't have it in this format, or if I don't have it in this particular citation style, people are going to look weird at me. No, we're not. And if anybody looks weird at you, then maybe that person just needs to take a step back and look at the work you've done and the love you've shown. That's more important.
Thank you. All right. The next question, is there a difference between formal and informal documentation? Should documentation be different for different venues? Do only competition projects have to be documented? How do I know what is required where?
Well, I would say to start, I'm not sure if I'm not a panelist, but I would say I've lived in 5 different kingdoms, and in each kingdom, when there's been an ANS competition, event, display, what have you, there's usually criteria provided in terms of if you're entering a novice project, this is the documentation that they suggest you bring to more experience, higher level of expertise. And during the past couple of years, there have been a number of online opportunities to learn about documentation, which have included handouts with templates. And I think the biggest challenge that I have seen has been the documentation that you would write up for one project on one topic or one type of project would be vastly different from another type of project. So tablet weaving to bardic, to storytelling, to an instrumental piece, anything performative, brewing, cooking, to glasswork, metalwork. They can all be like very different in what you can put into your documentation. But what I would say is I have found that documentation is when I'm presenting something or displaying something and I'm talking with someone and we're having that geek out moment of, this is so cool, have you done this? Oh, you've done this. And we're really enthusiastic and enjoying that conversation. And someone is looking at what's going on, but they're not participating in the conversation. The documentation allows them to engage with your project at the same time. So that enthusiasm, I would recommend, should get into your documentation, that it shouldn't be necessarily the dry. Because I think many think it's just the facts, ma'am. It doesn't necessarily have to be just the facts. I love the description of it as being storytelling, a narrative of your project. I love that.
Follow on that. I would say I do formal documentation when I know there's a rubric. And I will read the rubric and my documentation will be tailored to that. My informal documentation is basically when there is not a rubric. And that can be anything from entering a competition entering any competition locally where there's no rubric, doing a populous ANS display, or even if I'm doing a class on food, usually food or forestry, I'm speaking my documentation, which is where we start getting into my alternative forms of documentation is especially when we're teaching some of the forestry track, or if I'm doing a cooking class, I will speak to my documentation and be like, oh, well, like Pliny, this is a recipe from Columella, and here's what he wrote about it, and like here's why I'm choosing these ingredients, because this is also what Cato said, and so I'm giving you information, I'm giving you real information documentation, but it is in a much more informal way.
Okay. Other comments from the panelists?
I will say that it's not necessarily formal, but I like to have a list of books on me that I used if I'm at a demo or something, because that's probably as informal as you can get, especially for somebody who's new. Where do I go and find more information on this? Just handing them, it doesn't have to be the Chicago style or anything. A list of the books is always a good minimum to have to get someone else, on their journey.
I agree with that. As whether it's formal or informal, a list of the information that you used, whether it's a book, whether it's a website, or what have you, allows us to be able to speak to what you've done. And all of us love to talk, and all of us love to geek out together. I would rather have someone present their documentation in a way that they are comfortable, rather than in a way that will stunt their presentation or their growth within what we do.
Good point. Other comments?
I mean, I was, it's more important that I be able to find the information in the document that I'm looking for than it be organized in a particular way. As Her Highness said, like, yeah, if there's a rubric in play or like a set questionnaire or something, yeah, use that, right? Because probably people there will be using that to look for things too. But other than that, man, as long as it's organized at all, like, and I know where to go for, like, oh, what process did you use? How did you make this thing? Great, fantastic. As long as I know I can find it, do whatever works.
All right, great. I'm going to move on to the next question. And we've touched on this one a little bit already, but how is documentation traditionally done and why? Does documentation have to be a paper?
So traditionally, it's a written document, right? So it outlines sort of your inspiration, your process, your materials, your historical significance, and how you maybe deviated from historical practice and materials. So does it have to be a paper? No, it does not have to be a paper. Some people perhaps have a more difficult time writing, and so an oral presentation is also appropriate. If you've got your access to your resources with you, I've seen people do this in competitions where they'll give their documentation orally and show you physically their inspiration and their resources. So definitely you don't have to present a written document. A lot of people like them because they like to be able to pick something up, and like, I'm an introvert, so I really just want to like look at your thing without really talking to you. It sounds awful, but I'm shy. So if I can look at the thing, and if you sort of give me a hint that you want to talk about it, then yeah, yay, that's great. But a lot of people are shy about approaching. So my sort of the thing I've been using lately is like sort of video documentation for my format, because I'm very visual and I really love TikTok and I love YouTube. And I've been doing not just like I do teaching and stuff on TikTok and YouTube, but I found that for the last competition that I entered, I used video as part of my documentation, which I thought really brought the thing to life, because it was sort of half remote and half in person. So a video was really nice and accessible. So you can be produced, it can be something that you edit on an app like iMovie, or it could just be a video that you take really quickly. So
depending on the art that you're doing, a video could well just be better at conveying what's happening than a paper, right? Like if your research, what you're doing or recreating is a physical activity, sometimes a video is going to be better for demonstrating what's happening, especially if said physical activity involves, fire or, something big, flags, implements of destruction, what have you. Yeah, being able to just watch it, and if you've got the skills for it, set up some freeze frames, do whatever you want with it. I think people, in addition to being able to pick something up and not have to talk to people, which I'm all about, people like some kind of paper because you get to walk away with it and like use it as a reference for yourself. So, I mean, anytime you do a video, you don't have to. I think it's cool if you just like have a list of your sources, right? Like, so I can just pick that up, walk away, and realize that I'm about to spend $50 on more books. And people just like having physical things to fidget with, take notes on, being able to refer to later. But you don't have to by any stretch. Do as long as it conveys your information, cool.
Right. I generally, if I see a research paper at any sort of competition, I hope that you're actually your entry is actually research. Because there's that aspect of it. Other than just the basics, show us what you want in a format that makes you comfortable. We learned through the pandemic that videos were the best way for us to convey information and to stay together. If we stick to that and are able to carry it forward into our competitions, into our demos, and so forth, it will pay dividends, especially for those people that don't feel comfortable talking to another person face to face. Some of my mundane students, I've seen them actually type something out and look down, but then show me what they are looking at, or what they want to learn, or what they want to convey. And I love that. I love the fact that there can be that flexibility of how you present your documentation. And I mean, Donovan touched on a lot of great points concerning that. And ultimately, again, use a rubric. If you're going to do something in a formal setting, just look at what the rubric says. If not, you know what? Have fun. Have fun. And by you having fun and presenting it the way that you feel comfortable with, we'll have fun too. And we'll remember it. And we'll go from there. And and hopefully pay forward the experience. All I really want to know is, where'd you get your info? That's it. And that can be on a piece of paper. You don't even have to say it. And we can all carry that forward and learn.
And if something's missing from the documentation, especially in a competition, right, or a paneling, or formal or informal, if there's a discussion with other humans about what you did, if
Right.
someone looks at you and says like, oh, I watched your video, I read your documentation, whatever, how did you do X? What did you why did you choose material Y? If you can speak to that at the time, cool beans, like congrats, you just documented it. And then, okay, now next time, like, oh, hey, the judge might want to know why I chose this particular type of steel for my project. Like, okay, I'll just put that in next time. It's not the end of the world, right? Like, and you learn as you go, right? Like it's as much a process for you as it is for anyone else.
Right.
I'll make my comment very short, but I entirely agree with what Robert said about show us your passion. Doesn't matter what format it's in. Traditionally, yes, it was done in writing, but just as there are people who are more extroverted, more introverted, a lot of us learn and think and process the world in very different ways, and that comes to you also want to share and want to show what you've been working on in very different ways. And I think alternatives like oral presentation or video presentation are wonderful because it becomes extremely inclusive in that way.
All right, I'm going to take the two comments from Marietta and Lotta, but we're going to be really quick because we have to move on. So Marietta, go ahead.
I was just going to say that as somebody who is dyslexic, it's easier for me if I get the documentation ahead of time if I'm judging, so I can then actually spend the time and read through it very carefully and make sure I have all the pieces and the questions I'm going to ask ahead of time, like, okay, how did you do this piece exactly? But as somebody presenting, I definitely find it much easier to explain myself verbally. But on the other hand, I generally do write out the full documentation so that I can have that to refer back to on my own at the very least. And really, I think thinking about it as a science project from like middle school is a great way of thinking about what you're actually doing, not thinking about it as a research term paper for college. Think of it more as, here are the steps, here's how you can reproduce what I did more than anything else. And I really wish that the East would put up a couple examples of like, here's a well done, here's a couple different ways you could do this well done documentation so that people could at least see and read that, because that's one of the big barriers I've found is just being overwhelmed by the concept and just wanting to be able to read through somebody else's, which I just asked some friends and they sent them to me and that made it all better. But I think that in general, for the average person, it'd be nice if we post some examples.
Thank you. Lottie.
Hi, I'm Lottie from the Mid-Realm, and I just had two things to add because I agree with everything you're saying. The first thing is one thing that we've done or that they have done for our official Kingdom ANS is it is a rule that any verbal thing you say during your judging can be considered documentation. And that has helped out a lot of people, but it is in our rules that that's a thing. And on the video aspect, I love that video is starting to be implemented into what we do. I actually entered a cooking entry this year and had a video running of the process of making the item that I entered. But that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Nice,
All right.
thank you.
We've got to move on to the next question, which is, do I have to use the East Kingdom Champions rubric? It's scary.
Now I'm going to start us off. Mundanely, I'm a scientist, and I know if there's certain words I use, people's face go blank. Rubric is one of those words. It is a massive document. And I just want you all to just put aside whatever you think of the rubric. The reason it exists is because they want all the judges to judge everybody the same way. And they want you to know exactly what they want from you. They don't want any surprises. And so because of that, they made it very, very extensive. Now, if you were to go into a museum and look at something gorgeous that you want to make, you would say, oh my God, how am I going to make it? Well, you would start, where do I start? I start with what I need. So you just go through and you just take it one at a time, and you go very slowly through it. You don't look at the whole rubric because it's scary. And another thing is, when I did Kings and Queens the first time, the ANS competition, I really had a bad experience because I felt like I had to prove that I knew what I was talking about. And the judges were trying to prove that I didn't. And that is the wrong attitude to have. This is not how we're going to get you. This is supposed to help you and give you everything you need. Some of the things that you do won't apply to the rubric, then that's fine. You don't have to worry about it. But I really suggest to just take it a little bit at a time and read it before you start the ANS project, because that's also helpful, because then you know what you need to be thinking about when you're going through, how do I make this? How do they make this? What am I going to do? But just don't get scared off about it. It's supposed to be a helpful thing.
Yeah, I have a lot of big feelings about the rubric, which I'm burying right now. But it's, you know, if the question is, do I have to use the rubric? I mean, my not entirely serious answer is, well, that depends why you're doing this competition, right? Like, let me be like really just pragmatic about it. If you want to win the competition, if you're treating it like a competition, then you must use the rubric, because that's what the judges are going to be operating by when they score your project. And that is slightly mercenary and kind of competitive, but that is what it is, right? If you're entering a competition, you want to become the champion, you need to know how you're going to be graded. And that's it. If you're entering it to enter it because you made this thing and you want to show people this awesome thing you made and you want to talk about it with other nerds, who cares about the rubric? Go to town. Like, do what you want to do. You might not place well in the competition, but if that's not your goal, who cares? The rubric is something that I treat like a checklist, right? Like, you write your documentation and then you go through the categories and you're like, oh, they're going to be looking for, oh, they're going to be grading me on like, what did I learn from this that I want to do next time? What did I learn from this that I want to do next time? Like, I don't know, stretch more before I try to move like that. I don't know. But like, okay, now you've got an idea for like, I can throw in a paragraph about that, a line or two. Like, you know, it can be big, it can be scary. There's a lot of categories. There's a lot of like, you get a point for this or 5 points for this, but like, ignore like everything on one side of the page and just go down the end like, oh, they're going to be looking for this. They want to know why I chose these materials. Cool. Okay, I can talk about that. They want to know why I made something the way I did. You know, they want to know why I chose these modern materials. Okay, I can talk about that because I'm not made of money. That's why. Great, fantastic. Right? You don't need to go on for pages about each thing. Literally, why did you choose this material instead of that? Because the actual material is heinously expensive and has to be special ordered from, you know, a small Eastern European country. Great, that's all I care about. You're not made of money, and that's a good substitute, and here's how it's different. The end. Like, you touch on some points and you move on.
Use the rubric as a guide.
So I have a couple of things. And the thing about the rubric is this, and one, yes, it's ponderous to read, especially for the new entrant, or even the second or third or fourth time you've entered it, looking at this document, it's like, what the hell is going on here? I think that the rubric, while it is incredibly important to have everything delineated, I think that it can be presented in a way that doesn't scare everybody, that doesn't put everybody into, oh God, if I don't read every single word in here, I'm going to miss a point. So maybe, you know, here's the general rubric. If you want more information, here is the specific log right here. The second thing is this, and this is, I'm trying to balance here. Everyone from the entrant to the judge should stick to the rubric. The one thing that I've heard more people get frightened about is, well, this judge asked me this and I answered it in this way per the rubric, but they judged me subjectively. And it's like, I hate hearing things like that, because I think that the rubric is there to help. The rubric is there for us to learn from, and we shouldn't be frightened of the rubric itself. And by deviating from it in a confusing way for the entrant, it can lead to anxiety. It can lead to confusion, and it can lead to hurt feelings. So stick to the rubric and treat it objectively and not subjectively.
Right.
Another thing too is, since we're talking about competitions and using the rubric and wanting to win competitions, is that you don't have to, that doesn't have to be your goal. And I love and have taken advantage of the fact that piggyback on top of Kingdom A&S competitions and some other competitions are display categories for non-competitive entries, where you bring your documentation and your photographs and your links to your YouTube videos or your blogs, and you just put it there and submit it, and people get a chance to look at it and give you feedback, and you're not sweating the scoring. And that's a completely valid approach to showing off what you're doing and getting feedback. And you know, if it doesn't have to be about competition.
It doesn't.
All right. Thank you all. All right. I'm going to move on to the next question. What is the minimum information I need to include in documentation?
So I'll start. Minimum, why you did it. And there's no right answer. It was funny. It was cute. You know, I wanted to try it. Why you did it, how it was done, you know, medievally, how you did it, what materials you used, and your sources. That's kind of really all you need to do. There's a lot of other things you could add in there, but that's just the basics. You know, why it was different from what they did it, that's getting a little bit more into it, but just the basics of it is your materials, your process, how they would have done it, and why. Everybody wants to know why you did it. There's got to be a reason why you chose to do the project. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the very minimum.
I would concur with that. There's the what, why, where. Help me out with this. There's 7 of them. What, why, where, when,
How?
how.
Yes.
It's just 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you stick to those 5, I think you have a pretty solid presentation to give.
Agreed.
Any other comments on this one?
I had a judge ask me at one point in a competition, how would my persona have come in contact with the thing that I made? So that is also another thing to consider.
And so this is also, I think that question in particular, it depends on the rubric that you're being judged on, but absolutely historical context is kind of what that falls under. And so if there's a historical context category on a rubric you're being judged by, that would be one way to approach that question. All right, any other comments on this one? Yeah, 5 questions. I think Her Highness is a good approach to this. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Right. Moving on to the next question. What sources are okay to use for documentation?
I do want to say credit where credit is due. I think I just reworded what Vivian said. So.
No, you clarified it, Your Highness. Absolutely, it was better.
What kind of sources are good to
Yeah,
use?
so sources, like, you know,
I mean,
what does work and it does not work as sources for documentation.
So, okay, so I don't want to be like that academic who's like, well, go back to the MLA, you know, citation guide. But so that citation guide is, you know, made for academics to cite things in a formulaic way, right? Look at the types of things they give you guidelines on how to cite. Like, here's how to cite a conversation I had over Facebook with someone about this thing. Well, if they want you to be able to cite something like that, it's probably an okay thing to use as a source. You know, how do I cite this thing that I learned in this one class? Sure, you can cite that, right? Like, it's a good starting point for like, hey, could I use this thing? But other than that, like, sure, okay, books, sure, public blog posts, you know, assuming that you think the author knows what they're about. But if you had a conversation with a subject matter expert, if you can get it in writing, awesome, just so that's convenient to refer back to. But yeah, you can totally refer to, you know, sure, I talked to Dr. So-and-so about this. And in our conversation, I asked, could this have existed? And he laughed and said, absolutely not. And if Dr. So-and-so happens to be a known subject matter expert, that's legit. Because if nothing else, we know who to track down and say, hey, you were asked if this thing could have existed and you said no. Is that true? And not that we're going to check up on you, but like, that's what these things are for, right? Is so that I know who I can go hunt down more information about so I can be a bigger nerd. Go to town, cite whatever. Is it relevant? Can you tell me where you got it? Do the thing.
This is one of those, your mileage may vary. When I'm doing, say, for example, cooking or brewing, and I think this might be very specific to cooking or brewing, is I'll be reading a book like Cindy Renfrow's A Sip Through Time. Anybody in the brewing community knows this book. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. This is really interesting recipe that she has reposted. Where did it come from? I go to the bibliography. So I'm kind of one of those. I read the bibliography and then I get that book and then I read that person's bibliography and then I go to that person's bibliography. And so what I really like primary sources. So if I'm reading a book about somebody who recreated Roman bread and they reference Pliny, well, I'm just going to go straight to Pliny. And learn about what kind of the 67 different types of wheat that they had and how to make leaven. So I think the further you can get down into good primary resources is great. One of one of the things that I've learned is when you're recreating something or looking into something, archaeological evidence, written record, ethnographic comparison is always pretty good. But that's again, your mileage might vary on that. That's just how I kind of approach my sources, and I've had good results for that, because then I can talk about how I kind of got from like reading this one book on medieval recipes to finding the actual medieval recipe by emailing the library. I don't remember the name of it, but it's the records archive in Britain being like, hey, can you photocopy this like 14th century ale for me? And they'll do that. And that's cool. That's really cool. It's really cool. If you're that kind of nerd, which I am.
So sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Jump in. So some people might be wondering, well, what's the source? What's primary, what's secondary, what's tertiary? So these are terms that people might not be familiar with. So the primary resource is the actual object that you might be researching. It might be a document, it might be a diary, it might be some sort of a inventory. So that's primary. That's the actual thing you're getting information from. So secondary is good. Those are fine. So those offer sort of like an opinion or a sort of a critique of the primary source. So an example of that for me is the Woven into the Earth books. So those are based on, I believe, 14th century finds from Greenland. And they reinterpreted those. Well, they didn't really interpret them. They made reconstructions based on the primary objects, the extant objects. That would be considered a secondary source, right? It's a good source. Another one is tertiary. So that's like blogs, and for me, it's like encyclopedias and things like that. So those are primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. And personally, I prefer primary sources as much as I can. And because my research does allow me to have access to primary sources, I'm very lucky. I do caution people using things like Pinterest. I love Pinterest, like, don't get me wrong. I do a lot of Pinterest searches and pinning and organizing my resources, but it's like buyer beware, right? You want to make sure what you're looking at, right? So if you click on this Pinterest picture, you might not actually have an accurate description, or it's a picture from somebody's blog. If you click through and it goes to someone's blog, well, that might be great. That might be a great tertiary source. And they might actually also have a bibliography that you can work from. Sometimes they'll have a link directly to a museum. But if you can find an image that clicks through to a museum or some sort of academic source, that's best practice if you're going to use Pinterest. Pinterest has kind of ruined Google. I don't know if you guys have ever done like do an image search, right? Like Langenberg bra, like then you get those like Pinterest everything, and it might not be accurate, or somebody's reconstruction is insane.
Search Pinterest to avoid.
Sorry.
You can search for things with the key minus Pinterest, and then it'll avoid sites, which helps a lot.
Yes, I agree.
That is a great tip. I'm going to go with a comment from Eva, and then we're going to move on to the last question on our list.
Hi, I understand that I am from out of Kingdom now. I used to be in the East, but a lot of what we're discussing now seems like something when you're recreating something. And my question is when you are extrapolating. So a question recently came up in a class of, if I want to recreate a dress from that painting, and the painting is from the current time period, is the painting considered a primary source or secondary source? My opinion of it is that it's a secondary source, and you would follow up with that with other trying to find supplemental information. But when it comes to judging your sources, when there isn't an exact primary source thing that you're trying to recreate, you're extrapolating based on a multitude of information, and you created a thing based on all of the secondary information. How would you approach judging that in terms of it's an opinion of someone's based on supporting information, but there is no exact primary example to judge against? Did my question make sense?
Yep, and I
Absolutely.
have something very similar happen with me because of the fiber. I did a fiber study with period sheep, and when you make something out of sheep wool, you can't tell what sheep it's from unless you have the original sheep to match the DNA. So a lot of what I'm doing, there isn't really a primary sheep. There's very few DNA. So I wasn't gonna win. You know what I mean? I did my best thing. And what I did, that was not a great entry for Kings and Queens A&S, but it was fantastic as a complete anachronist. So sometimes you have to look at what you're doing and think about what competition you're entering into. Because
So is it kind of,
it's better for me, I think, to do Kings and Queens A&S, it's better to have something that you're recreating that fits
So-
the rubric better.
right, but within the East, I can definitely see that you have to choose the specific competition that you would enter for, but we're doing a little bit of interkingdom cultural anthropology here, because I'm not currently in the East, and my question actually came from someone who's in the middle. So is it kind of flat out, if you don't have a primary source and what you're doing is historical or forensic archaeology or something that you have no chance of winning?
You present it that it's a secondary source, and you say, I can't get a primary source for it. It's just like if you can't use a period material because it's dangerous or too expensive, you explain why
And
that you can't use it.
Other primary sources that are nearby, like if there is a dress from that time period, but it's not from the right country, you can say, here's the primary source for this dress, I made it based off all these other things. Here is a primary source of a dress of that time period. They used a similar technique here. And therefore you can kind of go at it sideways.
That's what I was suggesting they do, but given the fact that some people say, but you still aren't recreating anything, you're creating a new thing based on other things. It was kind of I'm going to leave this question up to more smarter people than me.
Ava, because I'm from the middle and I know exactly what you're saying, I will say that this subject has been brought up and hopefully we will discuss it. So hopefully, I mean, don't have an answer for you now, but I'm just letting you know that the issue with extrapolation versus recreation, especially with our new rubric, has been brought to the KMOAS.
I find it fascinating, and thank you for commenting, because I started in the middle, I moved to the East, and now I'm in Atlantia. So I have like 3 different, and even 4, because I've played in Callantyre. So 4 different kingdoms to compare against. And it's always been, how do you guys do it? And it's new each time. Thank you so much for taking my question. I really appreciate it.
All right, so there's one more question on our list before we get to the show and tell portion of our evening, and that is, what are some alternative documentation methods? Will these methods be taken seriously?
So I know Seamus is going to talk to this. Good.
I'll dive in first, and then you can take a shot at it, Agatha. I've used all kinds of stuff. I've used YouTube videos that other people have done that are kind of subject matter experts on boat building wood, for instance. So as a way of explaining why I'm not using a particular kind of wood. I've used homemade videos to document the actual process of building something, of demonstrating it being tested and used so that I can evaluate the properties of the thing I've made and my success in making it functional. I have used poetry that I found, period poems describing the thing I've made. You can use all kinds of stuff. There's really not very many limits. Your turn, Agatha.
Okay, so I recently discovered TikTok, and I really, really love it. Not only just for like watching, but also teaching. And so I use that as a teaching tool. But I also thought, well, I could also use it as a documentation tool so that people can see not only the process of making the thing, but also the process of how the thing is worn. So I'm a Laurel in garb, and we call it costuming. So I was fascinated by the idea of how things were worn in layers, because that's not something I thought about when I first joined the SCA. So seeing the layers of clothing and how things are supporting other things, and what would am I a peasant? Am I a noble? What would I have worn? What would I have used? So talking about that and comparing that to not only just extant objects, but also I use paintings as well. And speaking to paintings, I'm going to go back to that question a little bit. I did put it in the chat that we got to be a little bit careful about using paintings as a primary source. Personally, I think they can't be because they're not the actual object, but I have a couple little examples that I want to share. And one of them is that I love 15th century German stuff. So I was researching these gowns, these like pleated gowns that pleat under the bust. And I was like, they're everywhere in German art, and Austrian art as well. And I didn't know if they were real. Are they real thing? They are a real thing because I was able to go look at a bunch of extant objects, and the archaeologist had placed this fragment of something on this mannequin, and she had placed it sideways across the bust. And she's like, look, it's ruching here, right? And I was like, okay. And then I turned my head and I realized what I was looking at was a 15th century pleated gown. And these are things that I was seeing all over the internet. So like once you see a thing and you start researching it, you see it everywhere. And another example is the spraying headgear that was thought to be a bra. I started seeing that everywhere in artwork, and we were able to recategorize something that we thought was a supportive undergarment into headwear. And that was based on paintings and the extant object, the combination between those.
Yes. Great.
All right. Anyone else want to share their alternative documentation methods?
Well, I'll add something too. I'm a very process-oriented person, and because I make physical objects, and that's just the way my mind works. And I think I love to see other people do it, and I do it a lot myself, is I take a lot of photographs of my object and my tools and the steps of making the thing, and document very clearly and in detail the process I've gone through. And sometimes it's still interesting to post that and share it with people, even when I've failed in creating the thing, because I've learned things in the process. And so that's another way to share what you're doing and what you're learning and what you're making or failing to make. And because you fail to make it and you've learned a bunch of ways that it doesn't work, and then you take off from that and find out how it does work. And so, you can be creative in your documentation, you can be creative and in your goals too.
So more visual photographic documentation would be okay as opposed to lots of written words.
I am a very, writing is a labor for me, and it's not something I do well. So I like Agatha, I'm very visual. And so I've been finding it a lot of success in using visual communications to tell the story of what I'm making and how I'm making it. So
One thing I did a great deal of is, especially during the pandemic, was actually video a lot of my shop time. And I opened it up as classes or as a just come talk to me. And I was able to really not only learn the process better by recreating something for an audience, so to speak, than if I was just solo in my shop. And using Facebook events, invite people, hey, I'm about to recreate a fibula, whatever, and come see what I'm doing, and ask me questions and test me, be able to get my mind into the passion of telling you, the audience, what I'm making and why I'm making it and why I do hammer strokes this way, or why I work with the materials that I do. That open communication can sometimes be a boon. But I do know that a lot of people just don't have that, the spoons to open up their shop to an open forum. But I saw that we all learned in the process. It wasn't just me teaching a class. It was all of us sharing the love of a particular piece and the particular process. And a lot of these people were able to carry that information forward. And that's really the most important thing, is that they take that information and are able to go with it. And you in turn learn what you can't do, where your mistakes are, so that you can do it better the next time.
To follow along with, again, with what Roibeard is saying, when I teach Forestry Guild track, I love for it to be immersive. So people come into the camp, and all of a sudden we are a community in any time period, it doesn't matter, but there's a communal fire, and somebody's burning a wood bowl, and somebody's making a spoon, and somebody's lighting a fire with flint and steel, and then we have a few different people cooking. And the highest compliment I ever get was actually from Seamus, where he said I forgot where I was for a moment. I was completely transported into this community. And when you're talking about teaching classes or showing things that you're doing and showing your documentation, I think that moment is so important, whether you are teaching the class in that format, opening a shop, or just talking to somebody about like this weird little thing you found with how they did this this weave or this prayer bead or this piece of fabric, and how cool that is. And for like that moment, I mean, I think when we're talking about documentation for me like gets me to that place where you can have that real magic with people. And you learn things about yourself. You learn that you have like, oh, here's what I want to go back and look back into, or here's what I would do better next time. And yes, people, you go away learning something from other people, because I like to make my class very, very feedback forward, or feed forward. And people can leave the class having gotten something of value. And that kind of, again, like if SCA is a community, that is something that builds that community and builds upon it. So I hope that makes sense.
All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and part of what we have that time allotted for is to actually look at some of this alternative documentation. So panelists, who wants to put themselves forward for show and tell first? And I've got tabs open with all of your stuff.
Then I'll go first.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look. And I'm actually also going to drop a link for you. So in case we don't have time to go through everything, the link I'm putting in chat right now is going to be the link to all of the different types of alternative documentation that we're showing. All right, now let's see if I can find.
I'm curious to see what you pull up from mine.
There's Agatha, there's Donovan. Watch you. Lisa sent me all these links and maybe she did not give me one of yours. Where are you? What is this? Apologies that that's Lisa's. All right, so I've got Donovan, I've got Agatha, and I don't know whose this is. Anyone jump in?
You can
I'm
show
gonna
mine
try and
if you
find
want
this.
to. It's up to you.
Who is that?
Agatha.
All right, so you're Sinister, right?
Yeah.
Too many tabs open. All right, Agatha, tell us about what we're looking at here.
I don't know what we're looking at because it's blank. You're probably going to be looking at my TikTok. And oh gosh. Okay, so I wonder, I can't scroll down, can I? If you scroll down.
I can scroll down for you.
Okay, scroll down and there's a lot. You're going to be scrolling. I can't see any movement yet, but. So we're looking for the 16th century Dutch Get Dressed With Me video. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, guys.
No, this is fantastic. So I think, look at how many videos we've got here.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Keep going. Keep going, I think.
Oh, I need to make a curdle. I'll have to go back to that one.
So, okay, click on that Flemish short jacket and see what it is. I'm pretty sure I'm talking about how I want to make one. And so that's kind of a fun thing to look at for alternative documentation, I think.
Come on. All right, let's see what happens.
So I have been wanting to make a little jacket based on this image by Peter Buchel. It's called The Harvesters. He painted it in 1565. This little jacket is just so cute, and I wanted to make it to go along with my 16th century garb that I just finished. Here's another image coming up, a lady in the same picture wearing another little jacket in blue. So this video will be me showing you how I mock up my patterns. So this is my mock-up fabric, and I laid it out on a sheet because I'm using that as my pattern pieces. Once those are cut out, I label them with the date, what each pattern piece is and what the pattern is for, as well as the Ziploc bag. Now, I usually sew mock-ups up on my sewing machine, and I hardly ever pin anything. I've been sewing for 30 years, but every once in a while I do make a mistake and I run out of bobbin thread. So once I get everything else sewn, the sleeves go in, and I do pin those because those need to be eased in. And once I get those eased in, I can try on the jacket. So here it is. This is just my mock-up, and yes, I know purple is a fancy color, I get it, but this is just a mock-up. I could wear this in my regular world, line it with some cute fabric, but this is looking good. I'm happy with it, and I'm ready to make my final little jacket with my final fabric. So stay tuned for part 2. So I have been wanting to make a little jacket this by Peter Buchholz.
Nice.
Doesn't want to stop. That was excellent. So Agatha, how many videos do you have on that channel?
I don't know anymore. It's a lot. Yeah, so it ranges between things like that, like documentation, like it's something that I might want to share with in a competition, which actually I didn't make it for a competition. I just did it because people are interested in this stuff. So I talk about it. So I don't know how many, a lot.
All right. And so for those who are interested in creating something like that, how long does it take you to make one of those videos?
They are so fast. So I started on YouTube, right? And producing a video through YouTube would take me hours. And the sort of the learning curve for TikTok is a lot quicker because the recording is right there on the app. And it will take me generally about 45 minutes, depending on what I need to do, because often I will do process as I video. So I might take a little video of like this part of the thing and then stop and then keep working off camera and then come back to it. You can speed things up if you want to show something really fast so people don't have to watch you like sew really slowly for 3 minutes. It's really, really great. And it's really easy and user-friendly. This old lady figured it out in about 2 days. So it's pretty good.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Let's see what else we actually have here in terms of alternative documentation that's up. Donovan, would you mind talking about your blog?
Sure. So I have a blog because I started doing this before I could have a podcast. And I mean, I use it like a blog, right? In so much as, God, it's been forever since I've written a thing in there. I need to fix that. But like, if something strikes my interest, like, you know, what it opened up on with the Coille collection, that's cool. That's relevant to stuff I'm interested in, and I think it's cool. So I'm just going to throw that up there. If you scroll down some, I was actually just looking at it to see what would be a good example. So yeah, like this is, yeah. So like, I felt like doing a look at a particular knife defense from Marazzo's manual because I frankly was bored and wanted to just kind of go through it. And like, okay, so, you know, I'll dig out a picture, usually off of like Wiktenauer, and just walk through it. And, you know, I will usually mention which translation I'm using, but you know, it's kind of the height of informal documentation, right? Like, this is my blog. I can just write whatever the heck I want here. I'm not being judged on it. But since I'll at least try to mention things like, you can see sort of at the bottom, why am I trying to highlight this with my mouse? That will do nothing. Where, you know, I mentioned like, oh yeah, there were some earlier bits from Jess Finley's book. You know, great. And this I put in here because I'm a deeply serious scholar who takes himself incredibly seriously. But like, yeah, you kind of got to sometimes, right? Like, did you know Hulk Hogan did Fury? Neither did I until Facebook showed me. I care about what I study, but like, it's both kind of, keeping a blog for whatever I feel like reading about, writing about. I've got some entries where I just was like, how big were these things they fought on? Like these stages for their prize fights anyway. I've got nothing to do tonight. The children are asleep. I'm gonna go find out. And so I blogged about it because I thought it was neat. Other people might think it was neat. And if I wanted to do like an ANS project around it, it's all right there. Like, would I maybe reframe it all? Yes, I think if I were entering something into Kings and Queens ANS champions, I probably would leave out Hulk von Hogan, for instance. But like, it's got a lot of my thought process there. I can use that to remind myself where I was going. I either link to articles online or, I'll cite them in line, and I've probably got them saved from JSTOR because you can still get in there free, I think, and you should all do that. And, I'll know how to reconstruct that whole thought process from this blog into something more fleshed out if that's what I need to do. Or if I don't, this has what I need here to like, I can teach, I've taught classes by referring back to my blog and just kind of being like, look, teaching notes. This is just literally a things I felt were interesting and neat in my area of study, and I'm going to yell about them on the internet. And I'll try to include enough information for another nerd who wants to yell about how people beat each other up or whatever, to be able to track down my sources, and then they can yell about it on their own. Like, but the best part about it, similar to Agatha's TikTok, it's my freaking space, right? Like, no one's applying a rubric to it. I try to cite my sources because I think that's important, and because it's important for anyone who wants to, follow LeVar Burton's advice and read a book about it. So yeah, like, this is documentation. I, such as it is with Hulk von Hogan. Thank you for scrolling right down to that, Mariette. I really appreciate you.
I mean, it was there. I had to.
It's right there. Yeah. It's right there. I did that. But yeah, like, this is like, just like the TikTok, this is a perfectly valid way to study and document what you're studying. And like, I've got a bunch of other martial ANS people whose blogs I read, and it's great.
All right, so we're just about out of time, but I want to just scroll through some of these other tabs that I do have open.
Mariette?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so terribly sorry. I have a hard stop of 9:30.
No worries.
Thank you for allowing me to be a panelist.
Thank you for participating, Your Highness.
Very welcome. I would like to say, for those of you who do want to read documentation, my wiki, East Kingdom wiki at Corotica Senebelenae, Welsh persona. All of my papers are posted if you kind of scroll down, and hopefully that will give you some examples on kind of framework and structure. Absolutely feel free to steal the way I kind of frame my papers if you find that useful to you. And again, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
All right, really quickly, I'm just going to show these couple of things. So this is a piece of traditional documentation, but that uses a chart to illustrate key points, especially when you're comparing things. A chart, that's documentation. Here, a comic strip can be documentation. So both of those are from Leonette d'Angely. And so all links in that, all linked in that document. A PowerPoint presentation, can be documentation. So all of these things are valid, are ways for you to share your information. And I think to go back to that last question, yes, it will be taken seriously. I cannot speak for the universe, none of us can, but in the East Kingdom, for sure, we are encouraging alternative documentation. We will meet you where you are, and we will, allow you to share the information that you have in whatever format is most comfortable and most helpful to you. So, any last comments, panelists?
This is been
sorry.
a great experience. This is a great experience for all of us to come together and really begin to do the work of demystifying documentation and taking the fright out of it, and being able to present views on documentation that a lot of people might not have known were valid, and they should be, because all we're trying to do is be inclusive in our education, and we stick to our mission statement and we do the right thing. We're here to educate and have a good time.
I did drop Seamus's blog in there in the chat if anybody's interested in looking. Sorry, Seamus.
Thank you for that.
And I would say just, the more you do it, the more you do documentation, the easier it will get. And just don't be afraid of it, and jump in, and don't worry if it's not perfect. You'll get there to how you want it to be. Just start, and you'll be surprised at how much great feedback you get.
All right. Thank you again to all of our panelists. Thank you again for everyone stopping by this evening. I am now going to end the recording.